Hotel staff of Reddit. What's the most nusfw moment you witnessed at your hotel? Story 1. I worked at a hotel in a resort town in Europe. One of the maids called me to a room for help because it has been the location of an extremely messy orgy from the touring ice show. The room was covered in bodily secretions and there were used condoms thrown everywhere and half the furniture was busted. The poor maid was in tears, thinking she'd have to clean it. The hotel management called in a professional cleaning company who wore disposable suits, respirators, and eye protection. They got rid of most of the stuff in the room and charged a fortune to the ice show. Story 2. I worked at the front desk of a large convention hotel, one of the big hotel brands. The lobby bar was right across the lobby from the front desk. One night, as I was working the desk checking someone into their room, these two drunk guys in the bar got into a fight. They were really going at it, beating the shit out of each other, and they spilled out into the lobby. Then one guy picks up a bar stool, and just like in the movies, he crashes it down over the other guy's head. But unlike in the movies, the bar stool didn't splinter into pieces. It was solid wood, and he bashed the other guy hard. Other guy went down like a sack of potatoes, out cold, bleeding all over the place from a large head wound. I got to sit and watch as the cops and paramedics came, arrested them both, and patched up the one guy's busted head. Meanwhile, I still had guests checking in, wondering what kind of hotel they had booked. Story 3. I used to stay in one Marriott for work all the time over 5 years. I booked Sunday to Saturday for 20 months straight at one point, was cool with all the staff and manager. They would even hold my favorite room for me unless they absolutely needed every room with 2 beds. It wasn't uncommon for wedding parties, sports teams, so on, to come in, but one time, a church group came and booked like a quarter of the rooms. I arrived at around 11 Sunday night and the lobby was a fucking zoo. People were blocking the breezeway, several groups having loud conversations in the lobby, and their douchebag leader complaining to the manager about respect or some other bull. I got to my room, got settled in, and went to bed. Then the f***ing kids decided it was playtime and started running up and down the halls and stomping on the stairs, and the parents didn't do shit about it. I didn't get to sleep until well after midnight and had to be up before 6. Needless to say, I wasn't happy. I figured the church group leader might complain to the corporation, so I decided to call myself. I let them know that the staff showed extraordinary constraint and civility to an obviously horrid group of guests, and I suggested my minion do the same. We were both ambassador-level members of the rewards program, so what we had to say actually seemed to carry some weight. Got a call from the manager later that day thanking us for going to bat for them and that group of guests were banned from future booking. Story 4. Not witnessed but saw a portion on camera. A guest was walking the halls with a machete. He proceeds to go into his room. A few minutes later, the guest next door can be seen pounding on his door. The previous night, he had the woman he was staying there with. I'm assuming they thought he was her again. The neighbor started to head back to their room when the guest threw the woman out of the room, with her arm barely attached, spraying blood all over the walls and floor. He doesn't notice the door shut behind him, and he takes off running. He was caught very quickly in a parking lot next door. That room was something I'll never forget. Blood and flesh on the bed and floor. Boss said to tell housekeeping to clean it up. I quit a few days later. Story 5. One night while I was working on an audit, I had some guests ask if there was any way to use the pool after hours, as our pool closed at 11 and they were checking in fairly close to midnight. I begrudgingly agreed as I had homework to do and I thought I'd be nice. So I agreed and let them in. My mistake was not turning on the lights, which I left off to not make other guests who might happen upon it think it was open. So I let them in and proceeded to do my work and ignored them. After a while, I decided to check the cameras to see if they were still in there or if they had returned to their room. Upon looking at the cameras, I see them just going at it. At first, I didn't believe what I saw, but they were going to pound town. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to be that guy to ruin their good time. But I still had my job to worry about. Since the lights were off and it was late, I just let things finish up. I did get a nice tip from them as thanks for letting them use the pool after hours. That was the first and last time I let people in the pool area after hours. It was an interesting night for sure. Story 6. I was a night auditor at a home to suites several years back. Our usual extended stay clientele were traveling nurses, government contractors, or out-of-town veterans getting something done at the VA hospital. But we had one guy and girl on the first floor for a few weeks that were odd. It took us a bit to realize it was a hooker and her pimp. Some John would come to see her, and the guy who rented the room would come out to hang in the lobby or go smoke at our fire pit. Our manager was a bit clueless and took longer to figure it out, but once she did, she went and knocked on the door to ask them to leave. He only cracked the door so she couldn't see inside the room. He declined housekeeping for 2 straight weeks, but she managed to see an office chair behind him that had 2 handguns and a huge Rambo knife on it, so she called the cops. I came up later that day to pick up my check to find cops had surrounded the building. Turns out he barricaded himself in the room and held the prostitute hostage, so SWAT had to tear gas him through the window and use a battering ram to get inside. The owners fired our manager for that, for letting the sex work go on so long and the optics of cops swarming our hotel. Story 7. My friend was working the front desk at a hotel in a bustling city. It was a typical evening and he was dealing with the usual complaints from guests. However, this evening was different, as he discovered a large bag of cocaine on the lobby floor. Shocked and unsure of what to do, my friend quickly called the police to report the discovery. The police arrived and conducted an investigation, but no one came forward to claim the bag of drugs. My friend and his colleagues were left wondering how such a thing could happen in a hotel lobby, and it left them all feeling uneasy. Over the next few weeks, the hotel seemed to attract some rather unsavory characters. My friend would often have to deal with women who were angry and threatening, often because their partners had been caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing. My friend was frequently threatened with physical violence, and it began to take a toll on his mental health. One evening, a woman came to the front desk and demanded a room key for her boyfriend's room. My friend politely explained that he couldn't give her access without her boyfriend's permission. The woman grew increasingly agitated and began shouting, threatening to call her boyfriend to come and fight my friend. My friend remained calm and professional, but he couldn't help feeling anxious about what might happen. As the woman continued to yell and make threats, my friend quickly called for backup. Security arrived on the scene, and the woman eventually left without further incident. Story 8. When I was young and worked at a hotel, I was delivering a room service meal, and when I got there, the door was closed but had been left just shy of being latched. I knocked and the guest yelled, "Come in." I pushed it open with the cart, walked in, and he was standing there with a big grin on his face watching my reaction as I wheeled in the cart, butt naked with a woman, also naked, on her knees vigorously blowing him. She never stopped or even did a sideways glance in my direction. He smiled and reached out and handed me a $20 he had in his hand and said to just leave it there and close the door on the way out. I guess part of their kink was to show off and see my reaction. I was shocked, but never said anything to anyone at work. Story 9. I work in the back of the house at a major Las Vegas resort. When we first opened, management made every effort to conceal anything negative that might have occurred from the guests staying at the resort. One day on the receiving dock, an ambulance crew comes through pushing an empty gurney. About 30 minutes later, they came back with a body completely under a sheet. Someone had died. The NSFW moment was that this obvious man's corpse was that he had a protruding hard on tenting the sheet. It was rumored he died of a combined cocaine overdose while taking Viagra, and he died in the act. Story 10. Wrestling state tournament week is always hell, but this story takes place about 12 years ago. A wrestling team checked in with 4 coaches and 9 kids. The kids were all eliminated early in the tournament and went home, but the organizers asked 2 of the coaches to be officials for the rest of the tournament. The coaches agreed, and fuckery ensued. The first evening without students, they got hammered, then puked in the elevator. The second night, they got drunk again and went to bed. Then at I heard a door slam shut and looked up to see one of them staggering into the lobby butt naked. He was oblivious to my reprimands and flopped down on the couch directly in front of the front door. I called the police, made a key for his room, and got a towel for him to cover up with. The cops showed up and asked if I had tried to wake him up, and I responded that I was not approaching a drunk naked man while working alone. Cops got him up and escorted to his room. School wound up paying for damages to both coaches' rooms, and I never saw those guys again. I still work the night shift in a hotel in the same town and dread wrestling teams to this day. Story 11. I work at a hotel. This isn't my story, and I wasn't employed here when it happened. But basically, we have a lot of work crews that stay here as regulars. One night, the front desk worker, Q, heard a loud bang similar to how he described someone falling really hard onto the floor. A few minutes later, a guest comes up to him and tells him he thinks there was a gun that went off and drops the bullet on the desk. Needless to say, Q panicked. What happened was that the person in one of the first floor rooms had illegally bought a gun here and was f***ing with it, causing it to discharge. It was thankfully a hollow point, so it only went into the empty room adjacent. The scary thing is that if someone was sitting up in the bed of the room that the gun went off in, it would have gone through their neck. Don't play around with guns ever, please. Story 12. I worked at a once nice motel that turned into a flop house. Our clientele were hopefully construction workers, but were usually the scummy and frightening sort instead. Across the street from the motel was a closed-down Chinese restaurant that had not a prayer of being bought ever. Opening shift at the front desk, a nice gentleman walks in and greets me good morning. I say hello, and before I can ask what he needs, a shiny D-badge is presented to me and a request for the keys to a certain room. Yep, you got it. I handed them right over and watched as he pulled out a walkie-talkie and men in full SWAT troop into the room, around the parking lot, and apparently overhead in a chopper too. Yikes. I honestly couldn't believe it was happening, so fast and orderly, and I was a little scared honestly. But the man stayed with me in my foyer, and the messages relayed quickly. Some scumbags staying in our nicest room were big-time meth dealers and had a 3-year-old with them. The D had been staked out at the old Chinese restaurant and was observing us for 2 months. I had no idea at all, and I arrived at work at 5 a.m. there. Story 13. Many years ago, I worked at a very nice casino resort as a valet. Regular pulled up in his nice BMW and went to help. Wrote up his ticket, got his keys and offered to help load up his luggage on a bell cart while we waited for a bellman. Opened the trunk and went to lift the suitcase, and I threw my back out. I wasn't prepared for it to be so heavy. Gave it another go and heaved it onto the bell cart and heard a sound. Mr. X, did your suitcase just make an oof sound? Long story short, a prostitute who was banned from the property was stowed away in there to get up to his room. Story 14. During COVID, it brought in quite the riffraff to our top-tier level hotel because rates were low. Night Audit gets all the extra shit, of course, so we were expected to strip all rooms and take out the garbage of all checkouts that day. I found 3 different rooms that left butt plugs. It was the weirdest thing. A manager and I then planted one for our GM to find. It was great fun. We still reminisce about it. My coworker found a big bag of weed. Someone left a cell phone behind, and while trying to unlock it and see if I could find anything to use to get it back to the person, I took off the case and there was acid. I found an elderly woman crawling down the hall on all 4s. She had dementia and got out of her room. Thankfully, she knew her name. Coworker found a naked man asleep in the lobby. My GM came from an extended stay and he saw a lot of suicides in that hotel. The one that sticks with me is, a guy was a regular and a long extended stay when he came. He was always very friendly with my GM and they were basically friends and would have a drink here and there. He asked my GM once to have a drink and my GM said no that night. He committed suicide that night in his room. My GM said it really f***ed him up and made him feel guilty that maybe if he had said yes, he would still be here. The other stories he told me were wild on a whole other level. Story 15. I work overnights in a relatively small hotel, and at least 6/7 days a week, I hear people loud as hell in their rooms. Half the rooms have a balcony that overlooks the lobby, and those doors aren't soundproof at all. We had a man sleepwalk out of his room to the lobby, nude. We had a woman show up in the lobby in her underwear. Her boyfriend choked her out and stole her wallet with the room keys. And before I started here, there was a massive wedding that took place, and later that night, the groom killed his bride and himself in their room. Story 16. Back in 07-08-ish, I was working as a security guard in Hawaii. The firm I worked for had me at the Hilton in Waikiki or Honolulu, floated between both locations. A group of soldiers back from deployment threw a party in a suit that got way out of hand. We eventually had to call the police to handle it for us. As I'm outside greeting the police before taking them up to 30-something floor, a holy hand grenade of Chambord comes crashing down into the cruiser's windshield, followed by a few more bottles of liquor. As we got to the floor the party was at, we were greeted by an absolute beast of a naked woman on a rampage. Now I'm 6'4" and at the time about 270 pounds. This woman had to have been 6'6", 300 pounds of pure Polynesian rage. She's throwing tables, vases, pictures, plants, anything she can get a hold of. As soon as she acknowledged us and the police were there, she squats down and just starts spraying liquid shit and piss everywhere. In mid-attempt of trying to fling her waist, she caught it with her hand. 2 officers simultaneously deployed tasers, just leaving her to crappy flop in her own. Story 17. I was staying at a hotel when I was abruptly awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of crying and choking. At first, I thought it might be a nightmare or a noise from outside, but as the sounds grew louder and more intense, I realized that something was seriously wrong. I quickly got out of bed and made my way to the door, hoping to determine where the sounds were coming from. It didn't take me long to realize that the disturbance was coming from the room next door. Horrified, I realized that someone was being attacked. Without hesitation, I called the police and explained the situation. As I was on the phone, I heard a loud knocking on the door next door. Another hotel guest had also heard the commotion and was bravely trying to intervene. Feeling helpless, I knew I had to do something to help as well. I ran out of my room and knocked on the door as well, hoping that together we could put an end to the violence. The door opened to reveal a man who looked wild and out of control. I could hear the woman he was attacking sobbing and gasping for air in the background. The other guest and I stood between the man and the door, forming a barrier to protect the woman. It was a tense moment, as we knew that the man could turn violent at any moment. However, we were determined to keep him away from his victim and wait for the police to arrive. After what seemed like an eternity, we heard the sound of sirens outside. The police had arrived, and they quickly took control of the situation. The woman was able to escape the room, and the man was apprehended and taken into custody. As the adrenaline began to fade and the situation calmed down, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. I was proud of myself and the other guest for stepping up and intervening in what could have been a tragic situation. However, I was also saddened and disturbed by the fact that such violence could occur in a hotel room just a few feet away from where I was sleeping. Story 18. I'm working night shift as a receptionist and had my fair share of questionable encounters. One night, a guy comes from outside and asks if he could use our restroom. It's located 1 floor down, and every time we let someone in at night, we kind of scan the person before letting them in, and I didn't get any crazy vibes from this dude. After about 20-25 minutes, I got the feeling maybe everything wasn't okay and went downstairs. When approaching the bathrooms, I could hear him inside the handicap toilet and the door was open a bit. He was on his knees with his pants down, masturbating and sucking on the door handle while watching porn on his phone. I yelled at him and asked what the hell he was doing but could get in contact with him, so I grabbed a towel and threw it over his face to break line of sight. I told him to leave immediately or I would call the police. I went upstairs and after a few minutes he left the building. That one sticks out for me. Story 19. As a hotel receptionist, I have seen my fair share of unusual events, but nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced last night. It was a quiet evening shift, and I was engrossed in checking in guests when suddenly I heard a loud noise coming from the lobby. I peeked out from behind the desk and saw a man rummaging through the drawers of the reception counter. At first, I thought it was one of the guests who had lost their key and was looking for it. But as I stepped out from behind the desk, I realized that this was a robbery. I was terrified, and my heart was racing. The thief was wearing a hoodie and a mask, and he had a crowbar in his hand. I knew I had to act quickly. I dialed 911 on my phone while trying to keep a low profile. The thief was frantically searching for something in the drawers, and he didn't seem to notice me at first, but as he turned around, our eyes met, and I knew I had been spotted. He started running towards me, and I froze in fear. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the guests, a middle-aged man, stepped out of the elevator and saw what was happening. Without hesitation, he tackled the thief and pinned him down to the ground. I rushed over to them, and we called the police. It felt like an eternity waiting for them to arrive. The thief was shouting and cursing, and I was trembling with fear. But the guest who had helped me stayed by my side, reassuring me that everything was going to be okay. The police arrived shortly after and arrested the thief. They asked me to file a report, and I spent the rest of the night doing just that. As I sat at my desk, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the guest who had come to my aid. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't been there. The next morning, the hotel manager commended me for handling the situation well and praised the guest who had helped me. As I finished my shift, I couldn't shake off the feeling of fear and vulnerability that I had experienced the night before, but I also felt grateful for the support and kindness that I had received from others. It reminded me that in times of trouble, we are not alone. Story 20. I worked for a small extended stay hotel as a night audit. I had a couple instances that I'll share. It was New Year's Eve, and I was still fairly new to the job. I got a call from a room saying they needed help unlocking a door inside their room. I went up and unlocked it and started heading back to the front desk, or so I thought. They wouldn't let me leave. They said they were so grateful that they wanted me to have a beer for my troubles. At the time, I didn't drink because I was raised by Christian extremists and taught alcohol was a sin. So I politely declined and tried to leave again. No dice, they basically told me I wasn't leaving till the beer was gone. So after a moment of thinking it over, I grabbed it and chugged it. I handed the can to the guy and was finally able to go back to the front desk. Not really weird, but the other ones are. I was doing my night shift and started talking to this guy since it was a really slow night. We were talking about sports since our local professional baseball team was in the playoffs. He started to go a bit off subject and talked about his wife and kids back at home across the country. I didn't really care but still wanted to kill time. Then he asks me the question, "Do you want to come up to my room?" At first, I couldn't believe he'd actually had any ill intent. We were just talking about his family. I politely declined and said I have to stay up at the desk. He asked again and this time stated his true intentions. He was secretly gay and was very horny. I told him no, I'm straight and currently have a girlfriend. He didn't care and decided he was done asking questions. He grabbed my arm and tried to pull me over the desk and drag me to his room. I'm a fairly small guy, so if he got me over the desk, he probably would have gotten what he wanted. Luckily, I was able to squirm out and run to the office and lock myself in. Unfortunately, I forgot what room he was in, so I couldn't call the cops on him, didn't remember his name either. I remained in the office until my shift was over. We had this couple come in who were regulars. They were really nice and I loved it when they came in. They came almost every week. I was checking them in and talking to them at the same time. Keep in mind that they've been coming to this hotel for like 2 years already. We talked about a couple different things. She decided she wanted some wine tonight, so I sold her some. I don't know how it came up, but she said that they weren't a couple. They were brother and sister. Everything immediately came to a stop in my mind. I always figured they were a couple that wanted to get away every now and then and came to a hotel to get a bit frisky. But after thinking about it for a second, I thought there was no way they were doing the dirty. These people are completely normal. I just made assumptions and it made me look like so I gave them their wine and keys and told them to have a nice night. About an hour later, I get a call and it's them. They said there's a leak in their room. I went to take a look. The man answers the door in only his shorts. I thought it was weird for half a second, but I slept in just my shorts too, so I just chalked it up to it being just a guy thing. So I asked him where the leak was and he told me it was above the bed. I walked over to the bed to investigate. I was staring up at the ceiling and didn't notice until I was about to get into the bed that she was in it completely naked. I looked around and I noticed the wine bottle and it was pretty much gone already. I couldn't make any more excuses for them. They were doing it. So I got the out of the room and told them I'd change their rooms. I was never able to look at them the same way again whenever they came in.